A photograph. That was all it took. A small polaroid, barely the size of a playing card, placed on the desk of one of the most powerful and feared Korean mafia bosses in the world. A man whose name made grown men go silent. A man with a dragon tattooed on his neck, a Patek Philippe on his wrist, and an organization worth hundreds of millions under his command. He had been sitting alone for 40 minutes, holding it. In the photograph, a little black girl, maybe 5 years old, laughing, curls like a crown, and around her neck, hanging from a thin gold chain, his family's royal ring, the same seal, the same gold, the ring that only existed in 2 copies in the entire world. The other one was on his finger. His hand began to tremble, and for a man who had never trembled in his life, that meant everything, because that little girl wasn't a stranger. She was the daughter he never knew he had, born from the one woman he had ever truly loved and lost. A beautiful black woman who had disappeared 5 years ago without a word, without an explanation, carrying a secret that could shake an empire to its foundation. And now, the most dangerous criminal organization in Korea had found them both. What happened next? What that woman had sacrificed to protect her daughter, what that little girl was carrying without even knowing it, and what one man chose to do when forced to decide between everything he had built and the only thing that truly mattered. It will change the way you see love, power, and what it really means to protect someone. Before we begin the story, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is there. If stories about karma, love, and hidden truths resonate with you, be sure to subscribe to the channel. The photograph was small, barely the size of a playing card. A Polaroid, slightly faded at the edges, the kind that feels like it was taken in a rush, like someone wanted to capture a moment before it could be denied. Kang Min-Jun had been sitting at his desk for 40 minutes holding it. The room around him was dark except for the single lamp above the table. The kind of light that makes a man look older than he is, that turns silence into something with weight. His tenente, Pak De-ho, had placed the envelope in front of him without a word, which meant he already knew what was inside. Men like De-ho did not deliver envelopes without reading them first. Min-Jun did not move. He did not speak. He simply looked at the photograph. In it, a child. A little girl, no older than 4 or 5, laughing at something outside the frame. Her skin was deep brown and luminous, her hair a crown of soft black curls. Her eyes, and this was the part that made the air leave Min-Jun's lungs, were slightly almond-shaped. A detail so subtle that a stranger would have missed it entirely. He was not a stranger. Around her neck, hanging from a delicate gold chain, was a ring. Old gold, rectangular face, the Kang family seal engraved on its surface. A symbol that had existed in his family for 3 generations. A symbol that only 2 physical copies of existed in the entire world. One was on his right hand at that very moment. The other had been inside a safe in Seoul. A safe that had been opened once, 5 years ago, by a woman named Zuri Okafor. He set the photograph on the table. His hand was trembling slightly. He noticed it. He disliked that he noticed it. "She's in Atlanta," Taeho said from the doorway. His voice was careful, neutral. The voice of a man who has learned to deliver bad news without becoming part of it. "We found her 3 days ago. She changed her last name, moved twice. But the ring..." He paused. "The ring made it simple." Min-Jun said nothing. Outside, Los Angeles moved the way it always did. Loud, indifferent, relentless. But inside that room, everything had gone very still. He thought about the apartment in Koreatown, the one nobody knew about. No security detail, no associates, no business. Just him and four walls and, twice a week, the sound of music leaking through the window from the dance studio below. He had gone down one evening without thinking much about it. That was 6 years ago. He had pushed open a glass door and found a woman alone in a mirrored room, moving like the music was something she was having a conversation with, not just following. She did not look up immediately. When she did not recognize him. And he understood, in that moment, what it felt like to simply be a man. Her name was Zuri. She laughed easily. She asked direct questions and listened to the answers with her whole face. She did not ask about his work, not because she was incurious, but because she seemed to understand instinctively that some doors were better left closed. They were together for 8 months. He never lied to her. He simply never told her the full truth. There is a difference, he had told himself then. He was less certain of that now. The night she must have seen. The phone call at 3 a.m., the name they called him, the tattoo on his neck catching the screen's blue light. He had come back to find her sleeping. Or appearing to sleep. He had not asked. 2 weeks later, she was gone. He had not searched for her. He had told himself it was the right thing. That she had chosen safety. That he had, in his own way, let her choose. What he had not known, what no one had told him, because no one had known, was that when Zuri Okafor walked out of that apartment and out of his life, she was 6 weeks pregnant. And she had taken the ring. Not as a theft, as a message. One she had hoped, perhaps, would never need to be received. Min-Jun picked up the photograph one more time. "Book a flight," he said quietly. "No team. Just us." Dae-ho nodded and disappeared. The lamp hummed above the table. The city moved outside, and Kang Min-Jun sat alone with the face of a child who had his eyes and her mother's light, and the proof hanging gold around her neck that some things cannot be hidden forever. Atlanta did not feel like a city that kept secrets well. It was too open, too loud, too full of sun, the kind of place where people moved with their chests out and their voices unguarded. Min-Jun had spent 20 years in cities that crouched, cities that whispered. Atlanta did not whisper. And yet, somehow, Zuri Okafor had hidden here for 5 years without a single thread leading back to her. Until the ring. Min-Jun and Dae-ho arrived on a Tuesday. They took a rental car, nothing imported, nothing that announced itself. They checked into a hotel under a name that did not belong to either of them and spent the first day simply watching. She left the apartment at 7 in the morning. The little girl walked beside her, holding her hand with both of hers, the way small children do when they are not yet self-conscious about needing someone. They took the same route each day. Coffee shop on the corner, then 12 minutes to the dance school where Zuri taught. The girl waited in a small room off the main studio, drawing in a notebook while her mother moved through warm-up sequences with a group of teenagers who clearly adored her. Min-Jun watched from across the street on the second day. He told himself he was gathering information. He was not gathering information. He was watching his daughter draw dragons in a notebook, her small tongue pressed to her upper lip in concentration, and he was trying to understand how 5 years had passed in which this child had existed and breathed and laughed, and he had known absolutely nothing about it. The ring caught the light when she lifted her arm to show her drawing to the studio assistant. Even from across the street, Min-Jun saw it. He looked away. On the third day, he approached. Zuri was locking the studio door at the end of the afternoon when she heard footsteps stop behind her. She did not turn immediately. Min-Jun noticed that, the way she took exactly one breath before turning. the way she prepared herself. She had been preparing for this, he realized. Not today specifically, but for the possibility of today. For years. "You cut your hair," he said. It was not what he had planned to say. He had not planned anything. She turned. Her eyes moved to his neck first. The tattoo. The dragon climbing toward his jaw. And then to his face. "How did you find me?" Her voice was steady. That cost her something. He could see it cost her something. "You knew I would," he said. "That's why you put the ring on her." The street around them continued its ordinary business. A man walked a dog. 2 children argued over a bicycle. The world remained entirely unaware that it was holding its breath. "I needed you to know she existed," Zuri said finally. Her jaw was set, but her eyes were doing something more complicated. "That doesn't mean I needed you to appear." "She has my blood, Zuri." "She has my last name." They stood like that for a moment, close enough to speak quietly, far enough apart that it meant something. Min-Jun looked past her into the studio window. The little girl was still inside, packing her notebook into a small backpack printed with butterflies. She was humming to herself. She did not know she was being watched by a man who was only just beginning to understand the shape of what he had lost. "I'm not here to take anything," he said. "You don't take things, Min-Jun." Zuri's voice dropped slightly. "You just make it impossible for things to stay the way they were." He had no answer for that, because she was right. What neither of them knew, what was already in motion 3,000 miles away, in a conference room in Seoul, where 5 men in dark suits were reviewing a report submitted by a source inside Min-Jun's own travel detail, was that this conversation had already been observed, not by a stranger, by Daeho, who had stood at the corner and watched his employer speak to a woman from his past, and who had made a phone call afterward that he had told himself was loyalty. The kind of loyalty that looks like duty and feels like betrayal, depending on which side of the door you are standing on. The elders of the Kang organization had a word for children born outside the bloodline's sanctioned boundaries. It was not a kind word, and the instructions that followed the word were never kind either. Zuri locked the studio door. Inside, their daughter zipped her backpack closed, picked up her notebook, and walked toward the exit, the ring swinging gently at her chest, catching the last of the afternoon light, entirely unaware of how much it had already set into motion. The photograph of Hana was taken on a Wednesday. She was standing outside the dance school, waiting for her mother to finish locking up, when the shutter clicked somewhere down the block. It was a small sound, the kind that disappears into street noise before the mind can register it as unusual. Hana did not look up. She was too busy tracing the outline of a dragon she had drawn on the back of her hand with a blue marker, following the lines carefully, the way a child does when she is trying to make something permanent. Zuri found it that evening. She came home, set her keys on the counter, turned to close the door, and stopped. The photograph was on the kitchen table, printed, not polaroid, clear and deliberate. Hana, mid-afternoon light, ring visible at her chest, the school entrance behind her. No note, no envelope, just the image, placed where it could not be missed. Zuri did not scream. She did not cry. She stood very still for a long moment, the way people do when fear arrives not as a wave, but as a slow, cold pressure, the kind that does not crash. It simply rises. She called Min-Jun at 2 in the morning. He answered before the second ring. "They know where I am," she said. "I know." "What are they going to do?" There was a pause. Not the pause of a man searching for words, the pause of a man choosing them very carefully. "What I won't allow," he said. He was at her door within the hour. No Daeho this time. Min-Jun came alone, which told Zuri something she filed away without commenting on. A man who arrives alone at 2 in the morning is a man who does not entirely trust the people he came with. She let him in. Hana was asleep in the back room, her notebook open on the pillow beside her, a half-finished dragon on the page. Min-Jun stood in Zuri's small living room and looked at it the way a man looks at a place that makes him feel the specific weight of everything he chose against. The worn couch, the framed photo of Zuri and Hana at the beach. Hana maybe 2 years old, laughing so hard her eyes had disappeared. The small bookshelf, the dancing shoes by the door in 3 different sizes, Zuri's, and 2 pairs that belonged to a child growing faster than shoes could keep up with. "You built something," he said quietly. "I had to," Zuri replied. She was standing with her arms crossed, not in anger, in containment. "You weren't here." "You didn't tell me." "I knew what telling you would mean." She looked at him directly. "I knew what your world would do with a child it didn't sanction." He could not argue with that. Because she was not wrong. And the photograph on the kitchen table was proof that even silence had not been enough protection. He moved them before dawn. A different location, a contact he trusted outside the organization's knowledge. Zuri packed 1 bag for herself and 1 for Hana without waking the girl. She had clearly rehearsed this in her mind, the emergency exit, the minimum needed. Min-Jun carried Hana to the car. The child stirred once, opened her eyes halfway, looked at his face without recognition, and went back to sleep against his shoulder. He held her like something he was afraid to drop. In Seoul, the Council of Elders, Kim Woo-jin at the head, 4 men flanking him like pillars of something old and immovable, had already drafted their position. A child of mixed blood, born outside sanctioned lineage, raised in secrecy, the ring alone was enough to constitute a claim, and a claim, in their logic, was a threat. Their instruction to the men they sent to Atlanta was not explicit. It rarely was. Men like Kim Woo-jin had spent decades learning to say things without saying them, to gesture toward outcomes without naming them, so that the naming could never be traced back. But the men who received the instruction understood it perfectly. What Kim Woo-jin did not account for, what none of them accounted for, because it had never happened before in the organization's history, was that the man who had delivered Zuri's location to Seoul was sitting alone in a hotel room in Atlanta, looking at a photograph of his own on his phone. Not Hana's photograph, his own daughter's, 12 years old, living in Busan with her mother, who had left him 4 years ago because she could no longer watch him be loyal to men who would never be loyal back. Daeho sat with the phone in his hand for a long time. Then he opened a different application and began transferring files. The meeting was held on a Thursday morning in a rented conference room on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Atlanta. Min-Jun had chosen the location deliberately. Not Seoul, not Los Angeles, not any ground that belonged to the organization or carried the weight of its history. Neutral territory, which, in practice, meant his territory, because Kim Woo-jin and the 4 elders had flown to him, and a man who travels to the meeting has already conceded something before he sits down. They arranged themselves on one side of the table. Min-Jun sat alone on the other. No assistants, no security detail visible, though everyone in the room understood that the building's lower floors were not empty. Outside the windows, Atlanta moved in its ordinary, indifferent way. Traffic, sunlight, the small, enormous business of people living their lives without any awareness of what was being decided 14 floors above them. Kim Woo-jin spoke first. He was 71 years old, with white hair and the kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from decades of practice concealing what moves beneath. He spoke about tradition, about the sanctity of the bloodline, about what the organization had survived and what it could not afford to absorb. He spoke with the measured confidence of a man who has never been told no by someone younger than him. He spoke for 11 minutes. Min-Jun let him finish. Then Min-Jun reached into his jacket and placed his signet ring on the table between them. The Kang seal faced upward, the same seal that hung around his daughter's neck 3 miles away, in a room where Zuri was teaching her to braid her own hair. Both of them unaware that this conversation was happening. Both of them trusting, for the first time, that someone was handling what needed to be handled. "My father built this organization with his hands," Min-Jun said. His voice was quiet. It was always quiet. That was the thing about Min-Jun that people who underestimated him never understood until it was too late. The quieter he became, the less room there was to maneuver. Not with bloodline, not with purity, with choice, with protection, with the decision made every single day to stand between the people he claimed and everything that wanted to reach them. He looked at each man in turn, slowly, the way you look at something you are deciding whether to keep. That child has my ring, because I chose to give it to her mother. That was not an accident. It was not a weakness. He paused. It was the only honest thing I have done in 20 years. Kim Woo-jin's expression did not change. If you legitimize this child, you lose the council's support. You lose the succession. You lose everything your father left you. Min-Jun picked the ring up from the table, slid it back onto his finger. "Then I'll keep her," he said. The silence that followed was the kind that does not recover. It simply sits in a room and changes the temperature of everything it touches. What happened next? None of them saw coming, because none of them had thought to question the man who had been standing quietly at the edges of Min-Jun's world for 15 years, close enough to know everything, overlooked enough to move without scrutiny. 3 days after the meeting, South Korean authorities arrested Kim Woo-jin and 2 of the 4 elders on charges that had been building in sealed files for months: financial crimes, coercion, conspiracy across multiple jurisdictions. The arrest warrants had been triggered by an anonymous data transfer, encrypted files, transaction records, internal communications spanning a decade. The transfer had originated from a hotel in Atlanta. Min-Jun received the news on a Saturday morning. He was sitting on the floor of Zuri's new apartment, a temporary place, still mostly boxes, watching Hana show him a drawing. She held it up with both hands, her face arranged in the serious expression children wear when they are presenting something they consider important. It was a dragon. Large, wings open wide, rendered in blue marker with the focused imprecision of a 5-year-old who knows exactly what she means, even if the lines don't cooperate. And sheltered inside the curve of the dragon's wings, 2 small figures, a tall woman and a tiny child. "Is that a family?" Zuri asked from the doorway, a cup of coffee in her hand, watching them both. Hana considered the question with genuine seriousness. "It's protection," she said. Min-Jun looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then he looked up at Zuri. She was watching him with the expression she had always worn when she was deciding how much of herself to show. That careful, luminous restraint that he had spent 6 years trying to forget and failed at completely. She did not smile. But she did not look away. And in that room, among the boxes and the morning light and the sound of a city that had kept their secret long enough, something that had been holding its breath for 5 years, finally, quietly, exhaled. Dae-ho was never charged. Min-Jun made certain of that. Not out of forgiveness, exactly, but out of the recognition that loyalty is a complicated thing when you are loyal to the wrong people for the right reasons. He transferred out of Min-Jun's detail quietly, returned to Busan, and was seen, some months later, walking his daughter to school. The organization restructured slowly, without ceremony. Min-Jun did not name a successor. He began, instead, to build something that did not require one, something that could stand without the architecture of fear that had held it up for 30 years. It was slower work, harder work, the kind that does not announce itself. Hana turned 6 that spring. Min-Jun was there. He sat in a small chair designed for someone a third his size, ate cake with a plastic fork, and watched his daughter blow out her candles with her whole body, the way children do, leaning in, giving everything to this single moment of it. She made a wish. She did not tell anyone what it was. She didn't need to. If this story moved you, take a moment and reflect. Have you ever had to disappear from someone you loved? Not because the love was gone, but because staying would have destroyed them? Have you ever watched someone be judged, dismissed, or threatened simply because of who they are and where they come from, and felt that rage of knowing they deserved so much better? And have you ever seen someone choose to lose everything the world told them mattered just to hold on to the one thing that was real? Tell us your story in the comments. We read every single one. And if you believe in stories about protection, redemption, and the kind of love that survives silence, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.